Well, there have been some important stories around today, and we've covered an awful lot of them, but this is a story that has actually been around for some time, but has been very well written and exclusively written today by the chief sports writer David Walsh of the Sunday Times. A very special report, and a difficult report as well for rugby. Under the headline, they consider themselves blessed to be paid to play rugby. Now they are suing the game for the damage it did to their brains. 294 former rugby union players, professional and amateur, male and female, in class action against World Rugby, the RFU and the WRU, claim that governing bodies failed in their duty of care. Litigants included 3 World Cup winners, 14 England internationals, 47 from Wales, 4 from Ireland, and 6 from Scotland. 13 represented the great British and Irish Lions. Delighted to say that David Walsh joins me this evening on the Sunday Night Club, as does Prof. Bill Ribbons, who has been working very closely with this particular subject through a lot of his career, and also with his knowledge helping the likes and reporting to the International Rugby Board. Gentlemen, a very good evening to you. First of all, David, with all of you'll have written many difficult pieces in the past, and many investigative pieces and everything, but you know, this one about how many even young people still now have found themselves in the shell of the body they thought they were going to be in at this particular time of their life. And this piece is probably one of the most important that you've ever written, I think.
Yeah, some time back, Mark, I used to write quite a lot about doping in sport, because I consider doping to be the scourge of sport, in the sense that it destroyed integrity, it destroyed people's trust in sport. And then, you know, the whole area of concussion in collision sports, especially in rugby, which is a sport close to all of our hearts, or a lot of our hearts in this part of the world. And I remember having a kind of an internal debate, you know, saying, you've got so much time left to be a sports writer, and you've got so much time as a sports writer. Now, do you want to maybe shift from writing about cheating in sport to the damage caused by concussion in sport? And it was an easy answer. I prefer now to be writing about concussion. As you've kind of alluded to, it's a really difficult subject. It's a subject that brings no joy, except it brings concern, but no joy. And yet it's so important that if we don't highlight what has happened, to a degree is still happening, well, then we're doing rugby a disservice, but we're doing, you know, mankind in general a disservice. People need to know what's involved here, the risks they are taking, and the authorities need to be held to account in as much as we can, because in a general sense, my view is that the people who have been regulating rugby, administering rugby, have, in a general sense, failed the players. And they're trying to do better now, and they need to keep doing that. And they, you know, that this is very much an ongoing battle. And my view is that the game is going to change over the next 10 years.
Bill, bringing you into this as well, one of the thoughts I had with this, we're talking with top professional sportsmen and women here, but we're also undoubtedly talking at times about people who've played decent club rugby but have never been professional. We're talking about players before even the professional game began in the 90s. And also still, even at this time, how players know there is something wrong with them, but perhaps the families don't understand. And this whole situation now, which has lingered for many years, has now finally to be sorted, and it will be sorted in court, I guess.
Whether it's sorted out in court, Mark, I'm not quite sure. We'll have to wait and see whether it goes to court or is settled out of court. I have my own private views on that. But yes, you're absolutely right. It has been going on for some time. It was in December 2020, so we're 3 years ago, that the first announcement was made of this class action. And in the following 3 years, clearly the legal teams behind the players have been gaining evidence, obviously, unfortunately, gaining more and more players. But most of the emphasis, as you say, has been on the elite end. And we really do not know the full numbers of players that have played, as you say, grassroots rugby. Possibly their injuries began at junior level, under 18 level, and that's something I feel very passionately about, and I think David does as well. That we really do need to look after our youngsters. And the other thing you've highlighted is that, and has come through in David's excellent piece, is that the presentation of this problem, of these problems, involves a whole constellation of symptoms, which could represent other things. And it's only often further down the line to both the player, their family and friends, and also to the doctors looking at them, that the whole jigsaw puzzle comes together. And there has really been a problem in, I think, looking at my own profession, in enough people being around with the necessary experience to be able to guide players finding themselves in this situation along the right track.
Can I just ask one more with you at this point, Bill, before I come back to David? Clinically, it's been difficult in the past by using the present as to post-mortem results, isn't it, for a lot of this? We're now beginning to be much further forward, aren't we?
We are. As you say, unfortunately, the definitive test still is examination of the post-mortem brain specimen. And there are certain criteria that need to be met for that diagnosis of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, to be made. In the past and to the present, routine X-rays, CT scans, and even MRI scans, particularly when you're trying to diagnose early injury, have not been particularly helpful. But there are coming on stream new methods of imaging, which I think will give us earlier answers. But the problem is, as you can imagine, they're expensive. A lot of them remain research tools, and we do need to have them as soon as they have been proved to be helpful to be rolled out, so that not only your elite international will have access to this, but somebody playing for the old Rottinghamians third 15 will also get access.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, isn't it, David? I mean, the stark reality of the situation is also not just with men playing this game, but women who have played relatively recently too.
Yes, I mean, it's almost, well, a year and a half ago, I wrote about the case of Siobhan Cadigan in Scotland, whose life ended at the age of 26 following what her parents believe was a serious brain injury in rugby. And what the parents, Neil and Morven Cadigan, sought from the Scottish Rugby Union was some kind of detailed answer about what exactly had happened to their daughter. And they basically got nothing. At this very weekend, they've got a pretty comprehensive apology from the Scottish Union for various things that happened after Siobhan's death, some that related to before her death. But basically, Siobhan Cadigan was let down by the game of rugby. Mm-hmm. And that was before she died. And it can easily be argued that if Siobhan had had better medical treatment, she would still be alive today. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't available to Siobhan, even though she was playing for the Scotland team at the time. Mm-hmm. I mean, Siobhan played for the Scotland team 2 months before she died. And for the family to have to wait all this time for an apology. Now, I read the apology, and it was a comprehensive apology. But what I would say, having read it, is that it's not enough. Because what we need here is to understand exactly how the system failed Siobhan. Because only by addressing that and detailing that can we protect can we protect the women who play today? And the women who play today need to understand that they are at increased risk. That's what the science says in playing rugby. There are certain, characteristics of being a woman that make the risk even higher. The risk is pretty high for men, I would say, but it's even higher for women. And everybody needs to be armed with the full story before they commit to play the game. They really know what they really need to know what they're letting themselves in for. But something Bill said, I think, is really relevant. There's something we can do immediately, and that would be to stop all what I would say under 18s from having contact in training. That's an unnecessary thing. They do not need to do it. People will say that, you need those contact sessions in which there will be collisions in order to train them how to tackle. There are ways of training people how to tackle that don't involve bone on bone. And I would say that's absolutely the way we need to go. We need to stop kids having contact that's not part of the game. I mean, obviously, the game of rugby involves contact, so we understand that. But the load here is terribly important. If you look through all of the names on the people who have been diagnosed with some kind of neurological disorder or condition now, a lot of these players, the big majority of them, had very long careers.
Yeah.
What goes with very long careers is a very high load, and that high load increases your chances. One of the people I spoke to, Kieran Lowe, who had played with London Irish and Saracens and had played 5 times for Scotland, he said he's encouraged by one fact of his career, and that fact is that at the elite level it only lasted 7 years. Now 7 years is probably half what many of the other people who are now suffering the symptoms of brain damage had in their careers. They had very long careers. The longer you play, the more likely you are to end up with problems.
Yeah, and Bill, just with all of that in mind, I mean, I look back at my own schooling. We were a rugby school. We played in the Eastern England against some very, very impressive schools of Gresham's, of Oundle and sides like this, big lads at that age. And I was only speaking last year to the head of sport at my school from Cambridge, and really now it's only just beginning that parents are beginning to say and question whether their kids should be playing any form of rugby at school. They do already implement a lot of these schools now tag rugby, and you can play that rather and opt out of playing real rugby. But still, for both the great women and men at school who are very good at traditional rugby, they still want to play it, and this is the difficulty with all of this too going forward.
I would agree with you. And David, if I could just come back to kind of
course,
to say a little bit more of what David said. I mean, David brought the Siobhan Chatterton case to public awareness, and David, like myself, has spent time talking with Siobhan's parents, and it is absolutely harrowing. And if any of us needed any impetus to carry on with this campaign to make the game safer, just speaking to them, was the absolute stimulus that we needed. I agree about the risk that women take, and it really has been scandalous how little research has been undertaken on the women's game, considering that they now make up a significant proportion of rugby players throughout the world, and this is something that urgently needs addressing.
And David, with all of that in mind, of course, the other big thing with this is that there will still be this latest generation who are increasingly more powerful in whatever hits they are, and they could even be accidental at the highest level because they are so big.
Yes, yes, they are very big. They're incredibly powerful. They're fantastic athletes. You know, that combination of speed and power creates incredible collisions. And rugby, I mean, I covered pretty much all the big games in the Rugby World Cup just gone by. I mean, I'm thinking of games like France and South Africa, Ireland and South Africa, Ireland, New Zealand. I mean, England, South Africa. Fantastic matches.
Yeah.
Had you absolutely gripped your seat, even the final, which wasn't to everybody's taste, I have to say I loved it. I thought it was just one of those edge of your seats contests right to the final whistle. I loved it all, but there's part of me that feels like it's a guilty pleasure now.
Yeah.
I look at the hits and I wonder about the impact. I'm not going to mention this guy's name, but this evening I had a message from somebody. If I mentioned his name now, he would be an absolute household name. A man in kind of early middle age, I would say, and I would say virtually a legend of rugby. And in his message, he told me about the symptoms that he's currently suffering, and he's very worried by it. And my heart went out to him, as it does to every player. And Bill and his colleagues in Progressive Rugby are doing a fantastic job. And one of the things that strikes me about somebody like what Bill is doing, what I do to a lesser degree, because in a way it's my job, but these are guys voluntarily trying to shine a light on this stuff. And rugby really must be very careful that it doesn't make people like Bill, and to a lesser degree myself, like enemies of the game, because we're trying to highlight stuff that they don't really want highlighted. I think the rugby authorities, especially World Rugby, needs to absolutely change its tune on this, and to kind of they should have immediately tried to find a way of kind of connecting with the players rather than allowing this adversarial approach to become what it has, because it's now going to end up in court, and it's going to be a really difficult one to sort out. I'm guessing, Bill, and I'm not asking you to, I'd be interested in your thoughts when we have a private conversation sometime, but I'm guessing Bill is thinking that this may end up being settled out of court, and because that's what happened in the US when the NFL, when the former NFL players brought action against the National Football League in America. It was settled, but not in a courtroom. Yeah,
which in some ways is a shame that it won't happen that way. Bill, on one other thing, and there will be people watching this who've got young boys and girls who are thinking about playing rugby. Of course they will be, some of them, and what have you. And of course, one of the other things that still, I think, has to be reinforced and learnt is a period of concussion. You are then at extreme danger, in a way, of coming back too early and getting a second concussion that can then show itself at a much later time scale.
You're absolutely right about that, that if players come back too early, and we're talking about any sport, and have been involved in a concussion, then their risk of having a second concussion goes up enormously in those first few weeks, months. And as some people may be aware, there's this condition known as the second impact syndrome, which can be absolutely catastrophic and did lead to the death of a young teenage boy in Ulster several years ago. And once again, his parents have been absolutely phenomenal in their attempts to increase education and awareness. So we need to look very, very carefully. It used to be 21 days. I've got evidence that doctors advising the RFU back in 1990 were trying to discuss whether it should be put out to 28 days then. And as we know, this came back in the elite game to 5 days. Possibly they've now pushed it out further, which we're absolutely delighted about. I think they need to look at it further. We need to reduce second concussions. And also, Mark, it's not only concussions, but there's very good evidence that when you come back after concussion, you're opening yourself up to other injuries.
Yeah.
Ligament injuries, muscle injuries as well. Everything is related to this abnormal brain function when you're returning from a concussion.
Go, David.
Mark, just one point on what Bill has said is talk about ringing a bell. I've read a huge amount of material about concussed players in the last 2 weeks. I mean, we're talking about a file that's almost 5,000 pages. And the amount of players who remember getting a concussion in a game, playing on, and then getting a really serious physical injury is really high. Yeah. And the players themselves, they weren't connecting it. They just thought it was coincidence because they didn't see what happened to all the other players. But this is an absolute recurring theme that you get a concussion, you play on, you put yourself at risk, obviously, of a further concussion, but you're also putting yourself at risk of a pretty serious physical injury.
And just one final thing, David, to round this off, the concussion files part 1, you're obviously writing more.
Yeah, very much so, because if you said to me now, if the question was, with the material you've seen and the people you've spoken to, how often could, or how long could you prolong this series? I honestly believe I could go 20 consecutive weeks in the Sunday Times and have a different piece to write every single week. And all of them would be important, because that's the thing, you know, somebody was a legendary player, and I've just referred to one a little bit ago. But is that player any more important than the guy who played junior rugby at some amateur club and never got a penny for playing? Well, his family is as important to him as the family of the star. So his life and his brain is every bit as important as the brains of the players that we've all loved and enjoyed watching down through the years.
Well, David, it's an important piece, and thank you for your thoughts on all of this at this stage, and look forward to reading some of the other files to come from the Sunday Times. And Prof, Bill, great to talk to you as well, and I'm sure this is not the last time that we're going to be talking about this particular topic. Thank you both very much